get a lot more attention than it has.
Yeah, well, the work that the Center for Justice Research at Texas Southern has been doing is great. Give a shout out to all the HBCUs doing this type of work. They've put out a series of reports. My report is obviously focused on police accountability and one particular way in which we do that, and that deals with police insurance policies. Now, you noted body worn cameras. Body worn cameras do what they're supposed to do. They record things, but they are then going into an inequitable system that does not use the recordings in the way that they should. Now, we see it play out in some ways, like Derek Chauvin, Eric Garner to some extent, but not really. But these body worn cameras are highlighting what's going on. Another major form of reform that people were talking about deals with implicit bias trainings, which we do a lot of those at the Lab for Applied Social Science Research. I think they work. But they are limited because they focus on the individual and not the organizational structure. So, how do we do that? This is what led my research to this particular topic. Think about it this way: if you're a plumber, a lawyer, a contractor, a truck driver, the list could go on and on. You need insurance. But guess what doesn't need insurance? And guess who doesn't need insurance? Police officers. At least not for malpractice sort of situations, which we see in other sectors. They definitely have insurance to cover their vehicles, to cover bodily harm, but not to cover what they do to other people. Why is that? Because the current structure uses tax money to actually pay police brutality claims. And here goes the big number for people. From 2015 to 2019, over $2 billion with the B, $2 billion was spent on police brutality settlements. And here goes the kicker. Those were only in the largest cities in the United States. When you put all of the smaller police departments together, that 2 billion is actually eclipsed. And then that's even taken into account places, say like Houston, or actually the state of Texas, that has a cap of roughly around $250,000 for any payout, whether or not police officers kill someone egregiously or not. So we put that money together. Where's this money coming from? Does it come from the police department budget? Nope. It comes from general funds, out of money that could be used for infrastructure, for education, for work, for health, for improving the black community that these individuals are coming into and brutalizing. A better alternative is an insurance model that mimics what we see in other professions, where not just police officers, but police departments have to carry insurance. That will do a few things. First, that will put them on par with other professions. The next thing it will do, it will raise a level of accountability because as people know, if you keep wrecking your car, guess what? Your insurance is going to drop you. And how do we know this happens with police? Because small jurisdictions are actually the exemplar here. Because they're so small, they don't have enough tax money to actually cover some of these incidents. So they actually have a risk pool that they put together with other smaller departments. And when something happens, like say in East Tennessee, the insurance company came in and said, let me tell you what, if you all don't fire these officers who beat up this motorcycle driver, then we're going to drop you from the risk pool. And not only are we going to drop you, we're going to drop the entire risk pool. So what do you think happened? The mayors,
Oh,
city managers, and police chiefs in those other places hit up that police chief and mayor and said, you all need to fire those cops. And guess what? That's exactly what happened.
okay. I gotta pause because now you done said some things. I done took some notes. I got some questions, Doctor Ray. I have some questions. Okay.
That's exactly right. I mean, they have insurance for certain things, but when it comes to police brutality, this money has always came from the general fund. So in most areas, most cities, the police department, public safety, which doesn't just include police, it includes, firefighters and first responders, make up a significant percentage of the budget. To give you some examples, Minneapolis, Chicago, and Oakland, nearly 40% of all their tax money goes to public safety, primarily police. People in those cities need to ask what they're getting from that. In Atlanta, it's around 25%. In DC, it's slightly less than that. So we're talking about a significant amount of money. Above and beyond that, if one of us leave our homes and we get brutalized by the police and we file a claim, because as much as these large settlements, as much as we talk about them, the smaller settlements is what happens. The people that get beaten up, that get falsely arrested and get let go or get taken to the hospital, they have to get their medical bills covered. That money does not come from the police budget. It comes from general funds. And yes, police have insurance that covers their vehicles, that covers themselves if they get injured, but not if they do something to someone else. That money is put on taxpayers. So if we go to Louisville, Breonna Taylor Taylor, who was working as an EMT, her own tax money was used to pay her family for them killing her in her own home. Like, I mean, we have to think about that connection and just how linked that is historically to how we think about slave patrols and law enforcement being pretty much the oldest lasting institution that we have in the United States.
How does that decision get
It is. So a lot of it deals with labor contracts. So, police unions are very, very strong. Some of the strongest that we have in the United States. And I think that's really, really important. We should, police officers should have their representation. But accordingly, I think they've overreached. They have had the ability to really influence legislative decision making in cities and in states. We also have the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which we call LEBOR, which really provides a lot of protections for law enforcement. So what it's led to is as these settlements have happened, because again, we got to remember, a lot of these large settlements are fairly recent. And when I say recent, Amadou Diallo, who people probably remember, young African brother who was shot on his front porch, lit up like a firecracker, just trying to pull out his wallet and show his ID. In 1999, of course, people remember then right after that, Sean Bell, who's about to get married. Those were some of the largest settlements that we saw starting in New York. From there, proliferating, they couldn't figure out where the money should come from. So they started just having it as coming out of the general funds to cover extra things, and they plan to fight these sort of issues with litigation, which they were able to do pretty well until we started getting more evidence, whether it be body worn camera footage, whether it be DNA and the like. So I mean, all of these kind of things are playing together. But let's go to Chicago real quickly and look at what they've done, because they have so many settlements. When Rahm Emanuel was mayor, and we got to remember, Rahm, fairly moderate Democrat, but a Democrat nonetheless under Obama.
Some might quibble with that. So
yeah, some might quibble with that. I get that, but listed on where he is, and of course that speaks to the wide range of Democrats. He looks at the budget and he says, "Oh my gosh, what is this budget line?" And they say, "Oh, that's police brutality settlements." And he said, "Oh, well, how about we start budgeting for it?" So he started putting a line in there for police brutality settlements. Then peep this out: Chicago is so reckless that they had so many claims that they exceeded that amount. So you know what he did? He started selling the bonds on the open market for people to then charge the city of Chicago interest over time. So as much as people talk about prison labor and what happens with stocks and for prisoners, this goes, I think, a whole lot to another level, because now we have police brutality bonds where the people in the city of Chicago are on the hook for it.
okay?
No, I mean, as always, I mean, you're right on point. And that's the reason why when I went down the rabbit hole doing the research that I do primarily on policing at this point in time, I was like, holy crap, this is crazy. I mean, it was so much more egregious than even I thought. And as you noted, it's a way to protect the system. So we got to think about who the system is protecting, especially in cities. Especially in cities that are ran by Democrats. And there are a lot of them in urban areas that are, where they are
Why do
complicit
you
in
say
this.
especially cities run by Democrats? What's the qualifier there?
Because a lot of the cities that we look to that have these large settlements, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, St. Louis, they are ran by Democrats. And overwhelmingly, oftentimes, they are ran by black Democrats who become part of the system. So see, we got to be clear about that. And why is that? Well, this is why. But Baltimore, for example, not the current mayor. I think Mayor Brandon Scott is doing an excellent job. But the previous mayor that I could really go down a rabbit hole about, and just the level of corruption and discrimination that was happening under that administration. If it comes out that this is what they're doing on their watch, when, mind you, it was going on before their watch, their political career is probably over. So we have to realize what they have to lose here and why it's in their best interest to hold it together. Anyone knows if they work for a large institution, a large corporation, a large organization, they try to keep things in-house. What's the best way to keep things in-house? Keep it on the budget sheet, because people aren't going to go down the rabbit hole and look at the byline and see what things are called. So they can give out these settlements without them becoming a big deal. Of late, we've heard of some of the biggest ones, primarily because of Ben Crump and others that have been doing so much work to increase that. Why have they been doing that? They've been doing that because they are trying to put a value on our demise. And as hard as that is, by doing that, it's not just a monetary value. It leads to these particular conversations. Researchers like me, scholars like me doing this research, lawyers like you, commentators like you highlighting these issues. So we have to realize what is happening here, that they become complicit in these actions. And that's why I think we have to put people in office, not just based on whether or not they're Democrat, Republican, or independent, but we also need to look deeply at their policies, or black, definitely, or that we have to look deeply at what they're doing to figure out if they are going to change this. Because I think the way to change it is to have police officers get malpractice insurance. The city of Denver is doing that. The state of Colorado has mandated it. I think they have a good process right now where they say up to $25,000 of a payout. And people say that's not a lot of money compared to, say, what George Floyd got, or Breonna Taylor, or William Green. That's true. But in most cases, it's small. So they're making some accountability there. And then the rest of the money needs to come from the police department insurance policy. It has to be both. If it's only on the police officers, guess what? The city and the police department is going to kick it to them, and they are going to fire them, and there is going to be no change. It has to get within the system, and that is within the police department.
I think that gets to what you had mentioned at the outset of our conversation.
I mean, as always, bingo. The labor contracts with the Fraternal Order of Police is how we change this. I've worked with many municipalities when these union negotiations are up, and that is the time when you can make the most change. There are some places that I've worked at that have made so much change that the FOP has pulled out, that the sheriff's department has pulled out, the police department has pulled out, and then the city's like, where you going? We pay y'all. Come back to the table so that we can actually change these things. So it can happen, and it does happen. And you make a good point, because oftentimes these union contracts are signed for 5 to 10 years. They provide a series of protections for police officers, for police departments. When they're up for negotiation, that's the time to make the change. It's hard to do it in the middle of that. So people need to first find out when the union contract is up next in their city or in their county. Okay, say it's 3 years from now. Okay, well then at this point, you need to start planning 36 months out, primarily because they're about to start renegotiating in a year or two. So they're going to start doing it 12 to 18 months before. Next, you want to find the city council or the county council member who you think has been most progressive in making changes for law enforcement. You want to contact them, you want to partner with them, and they're going to start holding a lot of internal and also public meetings. You want to attend those, you want to be part of those, you want to share your story. And then as that contract is coming up for negotiation, you want to make sure that you contact your local paper, your local news programs, and make sure that they are highlighting that, because when things come to light is how we actually hold law enforcement accountable.
That was
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think people can search whatever in Google, Safari, whatever they use, and they can search their county or their city and search Fraternal Order of Police Union Contract. So it should pop up. They should search their city. So whatever it is, Atlanta and Fraternal Order Police Contract, DC, Washington, DC, and Chicago, and it should pop up. What it might show them is the last contract. People need to read that and become familiar with that. Not only will it blow their mind about some of the protections that these officers have, particularly in law enforcement Bill of Rights states, where they can engage in police brutality, where they can steal, they can rob, they can be convicted of crimes and still not lose their job. And I'll tell people some other things to pay attention to. The insurance part is big. And again, following the Denver model is the way to do it. Some of these things happen incrementally, but following that model where there's shared governance here, I think that's important, because oftentimes it's difficult to go from 100 to 0. So you start to make incremental changes. The other thing people need to pay attention to is actually what officers get away with and what the penalties are. And what I mean by that is, are they simply suspended with pay? Well, that needs to be changed. If they're suspended, maybe they should be put on suspension without pay. You know, if they are going to be held accountable, it shouldn't simply be $5 out of their paycheck for a year, because when people hear $1,000 sanction, they think, oh, that's a lot of money. No, because they do it over a year. It ends up being a Starbucks drink every pay period. So pay attention to these small things, because they add up and matter so much. Because this thing, police officers actually have a lot of internal accountability to one another and to their own department, but they have a little amount of external accountability, meaning to us. But if they do things in-house, they get suspended, they get put on desk duty, they get stigmatized. We need to have those things come to light. Another big one, if officers are sanctioned internally, there needs to be a list. There are places starting to do this. Maybe they won't always list the officer's name, which I think they should do, but they will at least list how many officers there are and some demographic information. This is information that you can use going into city council and county council sessions to say, this is what I want to see from my police department. Mind you, the money that you're paying for your own brutality.
It's a lot of health care. It's a lot we could do with $2 billion. We could rebuild healthy police departments with $2 billion.
Bingo.
Curious.